Welcome, Maria, Dixon Hall, and Jeff Hall. You're one of my favorite couples. So Adam and I just really look up to you. Thank you for taking the time to share with me and with our congregation today. And Maria, your post after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery was so moving to me. And that really led me to reach out to you for this conversation. But I want to start with this. Just today, the United Methodist Council on Bishops today, they condemned the racist killing of Ahmaud Arbery. And this is what they said, which I thought was really, really good. They said, parents of Black children live in fear each and every day that they themselves or a member of their family will be the next victim as the pervasive culture of racism and white supremacy grows each day. So that made me think of you all, because you're parents of Black children. And what is that like? What's it like for you?
Well, I mean, I think in one sense, to sort of demystify it, they're kids first and foremost. So there's the ups and the downs with that. And I think that being a parent is hard enough in a world that is not always the kind of wholesome, value-building world. But then when you add to it the fear of having to navigate school systems, community systems, and try to explain to your children why they may not be able to do something that one of their white colleagues can do. And then you're trying to explain it to a 7, 8, 9-year-old, or we have an 8, 9, and 10-year-old now. That's hard. That's not a position that I ever thought I would be in. And so it is like letting your heart outside of the door every day. It is, you're just letting your heart, my heart is out of my chest. It's in these 3 little people, and I have to worry about my heart every day. And I think that's how I look at it.
And I appreciate the bishop's statement to lead with the reality of parents of Black children living in fear. I never thought that I would raise children about whom I would have to be afraid, because my own upbringing was in a middle-class neighborhood, in an integrated neighborhood. I attended integrated schools. I was part of an integrated scout troop. I didn't think that the world was a scary place. And I hope that that is one thing that my white friends and colleagues can hear, is that is our experience as parents of children of color, that fear is an everyday reality. And we appreciate those friends and colleagues throughout the conference and in our churches who wish that that reality were different. Now it's time for us all to work together to make that reality different.
Yeah. So speaking of that reality, I mean, how do you talk to your kids about racism in our country? Like what is it that you say to them about what's going on? I mean, you said there's 8, 9, they're of a certain age, but how do you talk to them about it?
I think delicately. And I think, Blair, I shared with you that one of the most profound conversations I heard on this journey was hearing Jeff explain to our son why we were having a discussion about following rules. And I was trying to explain to my son, who's very precocious, you have to follow the rules of the teacher. You have to follow the rules. He's like, I'm just not going to follow the rules. I said, well, what if they call the police? And he's like, I don't have to do what the police say. And that just sent us into overdrive. And it led to a conversation between Jeff and Carnell I couldn't have imagined. And, Jeff, I don't know if you want to share that conversation, or do you remember that conversation? But it brought tears to my eyes.
One of the great gifts of parenting is you don't always remember the bad times. But that was a sobering conversation for me as a white man to say to my Black son, there are people who look like me who do not love you, who do not know you, who don't know your giftedness, who don't know your gentleness, who don't see your art, who don't hear your music. and will simply make assumptions based on the color of your skin. And that is your reality.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't mine, but it is yours. And I have an obligation to prepare you for that. And I recall that his response was, but that's not fair.
Mm.
And we had to say, that's correct. It isn't. But that's the reality that you will and your sisters will live.
And I remember at one point, he was like, well, we said, you can't wear hoodies. We don't want you playing with toy guns. And he's like, the police don't harm little kids like me. And Jeff had to say, that's not the truth, son.
Mm.
There's a little boy named Tamir Rice, and he was playing, and the police shot him. And I remember my son's face of, what? The police might shoot a kid?
Mm.
And that, I grew up at a time where you told, we had officer friendly. If you were ever in trouble, you could go to the police.
Mm.
And my kids are second and third guessing that decision. I have watched their anxiety go up when the police are near us. And we had an occasion where I was pulled over. I believe that traffic laws are suggestions. But I was pulled over, and the anxiety, and I was explaining to them, now mommy's going to put her hands on the wheel. I will say, yes, sir, and no, sir. You will be quiet. I will explain to the officer every movement I'm making. And I watched them freak out. And then there was another occasion where Jeff was with me, and they stopped us for something completely random. And I don't think the young man saw, the policeman saw Jeff sitting in the other seat. And it was sort of when Jeff leaned over and he could see, then all of a sudden it changed. And my kids saw that.
Yeah.
So, I have friends who are good friends of mine that I absolutely adore, who think this is all made up.
Mm.
And it's not. And in many ways, I'm grateful to share this journey with Jeff, because he's able to communicate to folks who might think, oh, she's being hyperbolic. Oh, this doesn't really happen.
Mm.
But I think it's given such insight to Jeff, to many of our close friends, about what it's like for us to have children that we feel like the world in certain aspects have a target on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Whew. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's, and so I think what has emerged in recent days, the conversation is it's not enough to just be against racism,
Mm-hmm.
that you have to be anti-racist. You have
Mm-hmm.
to be actively working to break down this system. So what advice would you give to individuals, to a congregation that wants to be anti-racist?
Well, the first thing that I would say, and it's interesting, I just finished teaching a course on what it means to be white in the 21st century.
Wow. Oh, I'd like to take that class.
And I had a good friend of mine, we studied all types of being white supremacy, white nationalism, all of that. And each one of my students at the end of their finals said, I know the right thing is to be a white anti-racist, but I live in a world that does not reward that.
Mm.
And that in order to be still a white person in America, you can speak it, but you really can't act on it. And so that was very sobering for me to hear a group of young people say that. I think the one thing that I would ask my white colleagues is to think about the unintentional actions that you do every day that reinforce the systems that judge Black and brown children differently, that judge Black and brown colleagues differently. Listen to the private conversations that are had and ask yourself how much of that is embedded with sort of an unconscious bias that we all don't like to think we have, but we do.
And I think that's where much of our work as white people can begin, is to recognize our anxiety and our discomfort when issues surrounding race arise. And I think the temptation or inclination is to move immediately to a defensive position, to go through our mental checklist of all the ways in which I am not a racist, my family is not racist, our church is not racist. And when we do that, we are already kind of practicing our racism. I think to begin from that non-anxious place to say, I need to listen to what's being said. I need at least to allow for the possibility that Black and brown and other voices of color are telling me a narrative that is trustworthy and true.
Yes.
And my first obligation is not to judge or critique or defend against that, but to remain open and listen. Even if it causes us discomfort. That's a symbol of our privilege, that I have the right not to be uncomfortable or discomfited.
Yeah, wow. Thank you. So good. And that really leads to my final question, which is just Arapaho. We are a predominantly white, middle class, upper middle class congregation. What would your hope be for us, or what advice would you give as we continue in this journey together to become anti-racist, to work to break down the system? What advice would you give or hope would you have for us?
Blair, I think one thing we constantly said, let's be anti-racist. And I think one way, rather than framing it as being anti-racist, understanding that there are languages and experiences we don't know and we can't speak. So the reality is that most of us don't have heterogeneous social circles. So that means that I can't speak languages of what it means. I always tell people, look, I'm Southern, so I don't have a lot of Northern people in my circle. So there's a lot of Northern stuff I don't get. And so when I put it like that, it eases people, because it's the same thing with race. It's the same thing with class. If you don't have people in which you have to learn how to speak their language, then it's easy to think of them as foreign rather than as someone who you need to take as much time to learn their language. If we're going to, pre-COVID, if we were going to Spain, if we were going to Russia, if we were going to China, we would learn how to speak key phrases of the Chinese, of the Russian, of the Spaniard. The same thing is with culture. We can learn to speak the language of the other in an effort to understand and work together. And so listening to narratives that I may offer, Jeff may offer, is a way for us to speak language to create shared meaning. And that shared meaning can allow us to share the gospel in new and powerful ways. So I always tell people, do not run out and grab the first Black person you see and say, I want you to be my friend. One, it might get you arrested, maybe not, but it certainly will get you looked at strangely. But the first thing to do is look at who's sitting around your dinner table. And when I say your dinner table, I'm speaking metaphorically. The people who you sit with every day, if they all think like you, look like you, work like you, and there is a great possibility of that, then that means there are languages you can't speak. So intentionally begin to interrogate new languages. I say to Jeff all the time, all of our friends are either clergy, professors, or lawyers. I say we got to get a better class of friends, and they all have typically 3 children who are around our age. So we are all speaking the same kind of cultural language, and we're missing the beautiful voices of our friends who are single, who are older, who are widowed and widower. And so this is the same thing. If the church could practice this idea of learning new languages and hearing new stories, then we would become the church of Pentecost, because Pentecost was all about new languages and new stories.
And I think the people at Arapahoe have to decide for themselves what it means to be anti-racist, and to establish goals that are both meaningful and attainable. And so the goal to be perfectly inclusive by this time next year might not be an attainable goal. But if we say as a congregation or within small groups, we will read a text that we wouldn't otherwise read, that exposes us to a reality different from our own, then you've made an important step. There are often pulpit exchanges throughout the conference, and that can be an important step. But I think there we probably have to be aware of the dangers of cultural tourism.
Yeah.
How do we participate meaningfully in the community of others? And how do we allow them to participate in our own community without being either tourists or voyeurs?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Great point.
Whew. Oh, thank you. Thank you all. I've just been taking notes as you've been sharing. And I love hearing your voice. I love hearing your story. And thank you for the invitation to expand that listening and to listen even further and more broadly for our congregation to do that, I think is a good goal for us. So you've helped us take a step today. So thank you. And I just pray for you all and your kids in this time of, quarantining and all being together. So I pray God's blessings on you as you continue to parent and as you continue to lead. Again, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. You are truly a gift from God to the church. And I give thanks for you. So thank you,
Blair. Thank you for your friendship, your kindness. I remember my time at Arapahoe that Sunday. What a wonderful, welcoming community. And so I wish God's blessings on that beautiful congregation and their fantastic pastoral staff. So thank you so much for inviting us and
thank you
allowing Jeff to tag along.
It was a great time together. Bless you.
You and Adam.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.